All right, Sean McVay, as we said, who knows? By the time you listen to this, he may have already made a decision. But look, there were already reports out there that even before the season started, there was momentum for him not coming back. We have to remember one thing, right? The guy is 36 years old. In good health, he can be coaching in the NFL for another 30 years. I mean, all right, guys, welcome back to the Establish the Pass podcast presented by ClutchPoints. I am your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan. We're back here to discuss plenty of stuff because there were some things that happened in Week 18 of the NFL season, and obviously a lot of playoff implications at stake. We know the playoff field now, and we also know that there are some head coaches that are officially out, ones that we had a feeling, Dillon, were going to happen, but we already had several that were official, but few more have been made official as well. We've got one still looming, although as you and I record, you never know. By the time you listen to this, that you may already know the answer. But plenty to discuss here, Dillon, as we jump into things after a wild Week 18, and again, a lot of head coaches that some head coaches have decisions to make, other head coaches looking for new jobs. So.
Yeah, it was a really fun week of football, especially, we didn't record last week after the Damar Hamlin situation, and to know that now he's got discharged from the hospital in Cincinnati, heading back to the hospital in Buffalo. Definitely after, a week where it was kind of dark and cloudy and a lot of questions were about what's going to happen moving forward, and for him to progress as he has, and then for the games to, him to be live tweeting the Bills playing and the two kickoff returns, it just brightened everything up. And then all the games across the board were a lot of fun. That's a lot of drama with a lot of things going down to the wire. Personally would have enjoyed the Sunday night game a tad more if the Lions were able to get in the playoffs with that victory, if the Rams had taken care of business in Seattle. But overall, still a really fun slate of games. And now I think the playoff field overall, and especially in the AFC, but overall, it's just can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun moving forward.
Yep, it is for sure. But before we dive into some of that, let's talk about some of this coaching stuff, because there is a lot to look at here. And one of the main decisions right now that is to be made, actually two of them. I'm going to start with the first one. Sean Payton, we know, is going to be back in the NFL coaching somewhere, is my guess, heading into next season. And, of course, the Broncos have been heavily already tied into perhaps bringing him in. He had mentioned himself that the Broncos had received, permission to interview him, and that is something that I think, can't happen until January 17th, I think is the date officially. So that's kind of a one you could circle there as a possibility. But, for Sean Payton, Dillon, he is someone that I think will, given what he's achieved, will maybe have his pick in terms of looking at all these different possibilities as it stands now. Now, we never know if someone in the playoffs could get fired. That's always a possibility too. But as things stand right now, you're looking at 5 openings. And as we said, there's another one with Sean McVay and the Rams that we will discuss in a second. That number could go to 6. By the time you listen to this, as we said, that number could get higher after the playoffs. But for now, Sean Payton and the Broncos linked together as a possibility. But as we said, there are others out there now. The Texans fired Lovie Smith the second straight year they fired their head coach for one season. The Cardinals fired Cliff Kingsbury. Don't think that was a huge surprise. There's obviously some appeal there with maybe the offensive things that they have in place. And then it's the other teams we've already talked about, the Panthers, the Broncos, and the Colts. So I guess, Dillon, one of the big questions is, will this be as simple as Sean Payton being traded to the Broncos as their head coach? Or do we think, do one of these other jobs maybe make more sense from him just from the standpoint of what we've seen throughout his career?
It's an interesting just case in terms of, I don't think he feels rushed. It's something that it maybe eventually could happen for McVay if he steps down and then looks at coming back down the line, in terms of they're not going to, a lot of coaches are in a situation where if you can get the opportunity to become a head coach and you've been an assistant for years and you've been a coordinator and whatnot, and an opportunity arises, it's hard to turn it down, even if the situation you're going to is far from ideal. I think for Peyton, It's tough. I just don't know. I think he's going to be patient, likely, in terms of waiting to see if other jobs open, in particular the Rams. I don't know if that makes any sense at all for Sean Payton and to go there, and if they would even have the draft capital to trade for him. I don't think it's, to answer the question about is it as simple as them just trading him. I don't believe so. I think a team would need the pretty good assurance that he's going to sign a longer term extension once he is traded and not giving up assets for nothing. So. He's going to play a major factor in where he ends up. Out of the jobs right now, I guess the Broncos is where the most traction's going, and where I guess it makes sense. I don't know. I think he's, his offensive background. He's just because Russell Wilson doesn't match the prototype of what the Sean Payton offenses looked like and what Lombardi's tried to do with the Chargers even over the last couple of years with Justin Herbert. And maybe it doesn't really match the skill set of Russell Wilson. You think he's a creative enough guy that he could figure out things there. They still have a lot of weapons. You even saw for moments, obviously, is against a lot of, at some points, backups for the Chargers, but also a lot of starters yesterday that the Broncos offense looked a little better. Looked like Russell Wilson was making some of the plays we're used to seeing him make back in Seattle. So maybe that is the one place where right now you could see it potentially fitting. I don't know, though. I don't know if there's a perfect fit for him. I know that it's the easy answer, but like before the season, everyone's like, if the Cowboys did not live up to expectations and they still did lose to the Commanders, and if they were to lose, to your point, in the first round of the playoffs to Tampa Bay, to an 8-9 Tampa Bay team, is it possible that that's the opening? Just in terms of fit for him, obviously his relationships with Jerry Jones and that organization tie into it, and how they, look at how over the years it seems like it's just kind of been a rumored thing. And the fit of the roster, the players, maybe Sean Payton doesn't run into this year. Maybe it's next year. Maybe this does get we keep pushing this forward because, again, it's not like other coaching candidates that are just going to get an opportunity and take it, whatever it is. Like, he can just sit and be like, Carolina, Indy, Houston. Not that I don't even think Houston would be possibly a consideration for him, but
I don't think so.
I just don't think that he's going to rush into anything. He has a unique situation at the moment where he can kind of just play it out and be perfectly content until that opening comes up, and maybe it comes down to just waiting another year.
Well, and it is, like I said, it's a complicated situation, right? Because it does involve more than just going and taking another. Like there's probably details of trades. Like there's just stuff that we don't. It's just that kind of thing that I think makes this situation a little more complicated. Although, I think if there's mutual interest and such, that it'll kind of work its way out. But it does feel like maybe it's a little more complicated than meets the eye. And I mean, I think that's what becomes interesting is if there's a job of a team that's in the playoffs that becomes available, then I think there's a lot more interest there because the quarterback position I think will be essential for him. And if you look at it, how it's lined up right now, of the jobs that we know are available, not counting the Rams, which I think you have to throw that one into play, if it does become available. The quarterback situation, Colts, you have no idea. Panthers, you have no idea. Broncos, you have Russell Wilson, but that's, as we saw this season, that's it's not the old situation when you bring his name up in that category.
No.
I mean, the Texans, like I said, I think Davis Mills was fine, but I think it's very clear that, their choice, if available, is going to be Bryce Young, although they may have given that opportunity away. And then you look at the Cardinals, who have Kyler Murray, but who knows when he's going to actually play again based off the injury, so you won't have him to start the season. And even then, I think there have certainly been ups and downs for him thus far in his career, so that's a lot of questions. So, I mean, he's. I think we had said, right? I mean, the Broncos. I think there's a lot of. I think that would make a lot of sense just based on the way the defense is structured, and of the group that's available. I mean, Russell Wilson is at his best still probably the best of the crew.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's unless you look at it as a draft pick situation where, oh man, if I'm Sean Payton, I'm looking at the draft and I'm saying, oh wow, I see a Bryce Young, or I see I don't know, whoever, right? CJ Stroud or someone like, and you just feel like, wow, like that's what I need. But those are, even with the quarterback, I think some of those teams that are bad of this group are bad beyond the quarterback position, and it will take more time to build back up. So
I think that the Colts become a little more intriguing by blowing that game. I think it ends up now they have the number 4 pick, and they would have probably been at least back at number 7 or so. I'm not positive. I think that's around where they would have been based on their record. Does that increase their odds to get if Stroud's available still at 4? He certainly boosted his stock with his performance against Georgia in the playoff game for Ohio State. I know we've mentioned Will Levis, Anthony Richardson. We're going to get on to all the draft stuff later, but if there's someone high up in the draft for Indianapolis that maybe Sean Payton believes, maybe the Colts do become a team that at least matches up with the Broncos. I don't know if that's one that ultimately is going to be really considering Sean Payton at this point. I don't know if it's really been rumored too much, but that's only one other factor there. But Kyler, you'd think that, and the Cardinals have the 3rd pick. Imagine they're going to, the needs they have on their defensive line, imagine they'll take one of Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. Do you think with that piece, there's just a lot of other things on that team for the Cardinals beyond Kyler that I would have question marks about. So it's just a lot of questions with these teams that maybe the Broncos have the fewest, but maybe they are the most attractive, where you look at it and be like, I can make that work. I don't know. That doesn't always pan out well, but maybe this is a case where, again, I think even if Russell Wilson doesn't fit right into the system that we've seen and we've come to know from Sean Payton, he's a creative enough guy. We've seen him do different things that he could probably figure out a way to make it look better than it did this season. I wouldn't doubt that. And that's not necessarily saying a lot, though. I think a lot of coordinators and other coaches, when presented the opportunity, might be able to improve that Broncos offense. Definitely something that we're going to be following this whole offseason.
All right, Sean McVay. As we said, who knows? By the time you listen to this, he may have already made a decision, but he's what's the wording, Dylan? He's taking the time to think about his future, the best for his family, and those kind of things. And I feel like, look, there were already reports out there that even before the season started, there was momentum for him not coming back. And I think at this point, like, it's just, you know what I mean? I feel like he's going to step away, because we have to remember one thing, right? The guy is 36 years old. In good health, he can be coaching in the NFL for another 30 years. I mean, that's a long time. And so, like, at this point, yes, the drive to coach will, can keep the seasons like, oh, yeah, I'm going to come back and let's just keep going. But at the same time, think about all the opportunities he'll have broadcasting-wise. He can step away for a couple seasons, season or two, whatever, and get back into it refreshed. If I'm a betting man, that's the route I'm betting on right now. But it does kind of make for an interesting discussion, because, like we said, then you can throw the Rams in the mix for Sean Payton. It opens up a lot of possibilities for the Rams for in a lot of ways, right? Look at just the structure of the roster right now. Like, there's a lot of questions, and we're going to tie that into the Rams and the Broncos in a second, because, as we said, maybe feels like the Broncos, may be the front runner for Sean Payton. But the one common theme between both of those teams is that both of them were hugely disappointing this season, and that opens up a lot of questions for Sean McVay, opens up a lot of questions for the Rams, and so forth.
Yeah, it's a tough thing for to really pinpoint for Sean. It seems like it's a buildup of not just the losing this season, but, as you mentioned, things happening before, leading up to the year, the burnout. He kind of just a workaholic that is obsessive over the craft, and thought, maybe when they won the Super Bowl that he'd have some sense of, gratification and relief. And the thing is, the nature of the NFL and life just goes on. Like, yeah, you won the Super Bowl, but after a week or whatever, however long it is, you're back trying to catch up on game tape and all the work you usually put in during those weeks in January and February, you're behind on. Now you're building that back up. Obviously, the personnel issues with injuries. I mean, they had they had a ton of injuries this year, and you look at a lot of teams that dealt with injuries in the past that held up better than the Rams did. I think it's just part of their structure that they were beneficial or lucky, and not just lucky, but how the training staff and the way the players condition and everything, to not have these kind of rash of injuries hit them in previous seasons. They have fairly solid injury luck over the whole Sean McVay tenure until this past year. So all of that built in together now with the losing and reflecting on a league that, and when you win the Super Bowl, especially, every team's coming to get you, and having that target on your back, but also the entire scheme that McVay and everything that the Rams and even the Shanahan further offenses have done for years, being targeted by teams with the way teams defend now. And you saw this year that having a really good offensive line goes a long way. Look at the top two teams in the NFC and how pivotal it is for the Niners. Yeah, they have great skill players on Philadelphia and San Francisco, but those offensive lines set the tone for what they're able to do. And the Rams just, Whitworth retires, you have injuries, and it's a tough thing. And yeah, for the way that McVay was talking in his press conference, only caught a few clips, mostly seeing what beat reporters were saying, seemed pretty reflectful in terms of, maybe he is looking back on it. Does he, though? At the same time, it weighs on him. And from Jordan Rodriguez, the Athletic, the Rams beat writer, she wrote about keeping in mind, and he's very much keeping in mind all the different people that are impacted by a decision like this. Like, he can't just probably step away and come back, back to the Rams. He'd have to come back coaching somewhere else. And after he built everything with the foundation of the culture, and even going into they lost yesterday, but they're still playing hard. They still beat the Broncos down pretty hard on Christmas. This is a team that didn't, for being 5-12, didn't really look that week to week necessarily down the stretch with how they played, and some of the younger guys pushing forward and knowing they're playing for their roles next year. So it's an interesting case. And for Sean Payton, I mentioned earlier, like the draft pick stuff, and I don't know if the Rams would have the capital to pull that off. They do have their second and third round picks, and like 9 or 10 when you count all the comp picks, total picks. But it seems like the Saints want a first rounder. They want to recoup the first rounder they traded to Philly for a lot. Trading up to get Olave, and I don't know. In terms of a team and look at the structure, does he believe Stafford's going to be fully healthy from Sean Payton's point of view? Maybe it could be attractive. Offensive line getting healthier. Everyone getting healthier. Basically every star player on the team. That is the kind of hire I'm sure the Rams would like to have if McVay is gone, but they might want to keep hire from within too. I know Raheem Morris being interviewed, I believe, for the Broncos job as well, but someone that as an internal candidate would make sense to keep that defense together, there's questions not just of McVay retiring, right? Like Aaron Donald almost retired after they won the Super Bowl last year. If McVay is gone and he's not sold on who the new coach is he going to possibly step down? I think Stafford's the only one so far that today it said confirmed he's not retiring, even if McVay, regardless of McVay's future. So, but all those things, I think Sean it seems like he's very cognizant of not just his own decision, but like how it impacts so many other people. So that's the tough part here, where I think that there's a chance that he'll step away, and the Rams have given him, there's no deadline for him to figure it out, which will make it tough if they want to hire someone else, or limiting the chance of one of their own, like a Raheem Morris getting hired somewhere else, and now they can't promote from within. It's all kind of open in the air. And again, another thing that McVay is probably very cognizant about is the impact of how waiting makes it more difficult for the Rams if he does move on. So all these things, it feels like hopefully within the week or so we'd get some answers, like you mentioned, by the time we can be recording right now and see something come out about this. But I don't know if Sean Payton, organizationally, yes, I think that would have been I'd still, even with their record, you'd still like to think that the Rams would be one of the more preferable openings of the current list. But I just don't know if it's going to work out, just given that Sean Payton's still under contract. The same way that if McVay did come back and maybe let's say he steps away and within 2 years wants to get back into coaching, he's still under contract through 2026. So another team's going to have to trade for him the same way at that point, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of trades coaching-wise at this point. But, all right, before we get to the games, quickly, if we have to look back on it, and we have to make our choice, Rams or Broncos? Who was the more disappointing team in the 2022 NFL season?
I'm biased as a Rams fan. I think it does cushion the blow. It does cushion the blow winning the Super Bowl the year before, but to have the worst record of any team to win a Super Bowl, I think the next season, I think the Rams would qualify for me. It's a tough. I think the question though is valid. I mean, the Broncos' expectations were the bare minimum. In their building, they thought they were a Super Bowl contender, but the bare minimum was a playoff team, right? Even in a loaded AFC, and to be that awful on offense and not, have a defense that played so well and feel like with that unit at the capabilities they had, you had a really good chance to be a threat. So I think it's valid, but I know the injuries are one thing, but to go from, the Super Bowl to 5-12 is pretty remarkable. And if McVay does stay, I am intrigued by what next year could look like and what this despair and falling down into this the depths of the NFL, what it could do for McVay this offseason as a refresher. But even with another coach, I do think they still have a lot of potential, and so do the Broncos. But yeah, I think both teams are probably the two biggest failures in the league. It's just a matter of opinion, which one's number one and what's number two, in my opinion, at least. Outside of, you could make different it's a whole different discussion for a team like the Texans, where we knew they were going to be bad. But the dysfunction with the way they've fired coaches and whatnot, it's a whole different story.
Yep. I think just being Super Bowl champion and going, like you said, to that record, you probably picked the Rams because, the Broncos, I don't know that some people were projecting as a playoff team, but it wasn't like they were going to win the division or anything.
Yeah.
But, boy, when you watch the Broncos, for first-year coach, it's about as disappointing as it gets. So two separate situations, but I think the fact that the Rams won the Super Bowl makes them probably the choice here on that. All right, let's jump into we're not going to go, as we usually do, we usually go through every game, get some thoughts on it. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to focus on the games that have playoff implications because you already know who won the games and you already know the playoff schedule. So we're going to kind of focus more on those games, and then we'll get into the actual picks once we, get into the next episode for our playoff game picks on that. So, all right, let's talk about the Titans and the Jags because that was an interesting game where, quite honestly, I felt like all the momentum had somehow swung in the Titans' favor as this game had gone along. But then the final stretch of the game happened, and it completely changed everything. I felt like the Titans were just going to kind of grind their way to a win there, but a couple key mistakes late changed everything, and that gave the Jags the momentum. And quite honestly, even though the way the game was playing out, you thought one thing. If you looked at the trends, these were two teams heading in opposite directions, and I think the Jags have a much better chance of winning a playoff game than the Titans do. And so I think, for the Jags to win was not surprising, the outcome, but maybe how they got there was a little surprising just based on how that game played out.
Yeah, their defense really put the team on their back on both sides, right? Like you're mentioning, Tennessee had all the momentum. They were dominating in that second half, and even a few other times the Jaguars got a little cute with some of their play calls. They had that one turnover on the end around trick play, but it still just felt like they were dominating up front. You'd see the push, and you'd see like the little moments where it's like Trevor Lawrence has someone open, but he just has to step back because they're getting through the interior of the line and making him throw off his back foot. It kind of became a theme of the whole second half, and it was just like, what's going to happen? Are they going to just really hold on to this lead? And then obviously it just takes one play that, they didn't really talk about it as much of a controversy on TV. I thought it was pretty close. If Dobbs had fumbled the ball, I did think ultimately watching in slow-mo that it had probably come loose before his hand flipped it forward, but they kind of just like confirmed that really quickly. I thought they would have taken a little more time to look over that. But yeah, like you mentioned, the Jags probably a bigger threat moving forward in the playoffs. I'm sure from the point of view of the Chargers, and even at the time the Ravens thinking they had a shot at the 5 seed. I'm sure they were probably wanting the Titans to win, even against that defensive front, which is a problem and has been really good for Tennessee in years past. We saw what they did in the playoffs against the Bengals a year ago with all those sacks. But it's just on offense. Yes, Derrick Henry still looked pretty good in this game. They're still able to do some things. Dobbs looked, both games against Dallas and Jacksonville, I thought he looked pretty good. I think it'll be interesting to see where he ends up as a backup option that has some higher floor maybe than some of these other guys. But ultimately, the thing is, that's impressive about this for the Jaguars. They finished last in DVOA last year. To finish 13th this year and be a top 10 offense, it's everything you could have hoped for from Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. His whole development has been in the second half of the season in particular. He's really come into his own and become one of the top young quarterbacks in the league with a league full of top young quarterbacks, a conference full of them. But the thing that was really impressive about this was the fact they still won, not because of him, but because of their defense making plays. And you saw Trayvon Walker, we haven't hardly talked about him on this podcast, much less than any other number one pick probably since we started. And he has a big sack, a big pressure that leads to another sack. Their whole defensive line kind of came together down the stretch there against, Tennessee's O-line has its issues, but it was impressive to see. And you do think that now that Charger-Jag game is going to be pretty entertaining. You got two young, really fun quarterbacks and defenses that have question marks, and a defense for the Chargers that until yesterday had looked pretty good, right? Their secondary in the second half of the year had been one of the better ones, advanced stat-wise, any regular counting stats, and rough day, but not much to play for, but it's going to be a really fun matchup to watch those two go at it, and interesting to see, the Jaguars again go from where they were last year, all the questions we had, and you have to think that Doug Peterson's going to be in the running with Brian Dable and Dan Campbell and some of these other coaches that were able to put together, Pete Carroll, even like seasons where you just didn't expect maybe quite as good of a year, especially for the Jags though, to start like they did. I think they're 7-2 in their last 9, something like that. It's just they're definitely going to be a really fun team to follow moving forward. And you saw the city embrace them too. The atmosphere in Jacksonville was, even when they made the playoffs, in the Blake Bortles era, I feel like that I hadn't seen an atmosphere in Jacksonville like that since I was a pretty young kid.
Yeah, no, it's fun to see. And again, we thought some of the pieces were in place. It was just a matter of how quickly it could all get there, and here they are now in the playoffs. And as we'll talk about in the preview, it's not the worst matchup in the world, I don't think, for the Jags hosting a playoff game against the Chargers. So we'll talk about it, see what we decide on our picks there. Certainly a disappointing finish for the Titans, who will be looking for a new GM to try to figure out their path forward. And perhaps look at their quarterback situation and see what happens there. So a lot to figure out for the Titans, I think, this offseason. All right, more AFC drama, of course, took place in trying to figure out who was going to get the final playoff spots. The Patriots, we're in a good spot technically. We're not in a good spot in the fact that they had to play in Buffalo against the Bills. And, of course, the Jets-Dolphins game had ramifications on that, and so did the Browns-Steelers. Of course, you start with the Bills-Patriots. You certainly could not have – I don't even know. It's still wild to me that the game opens on a kickoff return in favor of the Bills. And, of course, Nyheim Hines winds up returning 2 kicks for a touchdown in that game. First time that's happened in a long time. You look at it from that standpoint. Bills win the game. I don't think you're any surprised by that at all, given the Damar Hamlin situation. That was a very emotional game for the Bills. Patriots just were – it was always going to be tough, I think, to win that game to get into the playoffs. Meanwhile, Dolphins-Jets was not pretty. But, I don't think that's surprising either, given the fact that Tua was not playing. You knew the Jets were going to make this a defensive type of grind, I think, and Dolphins just find a way, and that's all you can ask for at this time of year. You just find a way to win. So, of course, the Dolphins are the team of this trio of games that gets into the playoffs. Given that, Steelers did their job by getting a win, but ultimately it doesn't matter there.
Yeah, outside of keeping that record going for Mike Tomlin and Pittsburgh, finding ways to I think they also went 7-2 in their last 9, and for finding a way to get a winning record by the end of it at 9-8. Credit to them to not just pack it in when they were 2-6 and really fight down the stretch. And I thought Kenny Pickett really improved over the course of the year. But yeah, as you mentioned, it didn't matter. Things looked like they were possibly going to break their way perfectly with the outcomes. Just the Jets. Joe Flacco wasn't able to do anything, and I know we talk a lot about we have in the past about running backs only having so much importance to an offense, but you look at the difference between when Breece Hall was healthy and when he wasn't, and even with the quarterback's situation there, they were still getting the job done enough. That defense, we talked about them last year. They were going into the season. I still had concerns they were going to be that good because they finished like 31st in DVOA. They were awful. To finish 5th and then miss the playoffs the way they did, it's disappointing. And at least maybe try to do what the Lions did by pulling in your division rival down with you like they could have with the Dolphins. It was right on the table. It's not like Skylar Thompson was lighting the field on fire. And Miami just, found a way. Like you said, it was a game. Not your typical 9-6 what you're really anticipating for a game with the playoffs on the line. But Dolphins find a way. I'm sure by Wednesday we'll have maybe a little more information on whether Tua will play. I know Tyreek talked about it, and Mike McDaniels has made it seem like, and rightfully, that they're going to just not try to rush anything. If he's cleared, he's cleared. If he's not, he's not, and that is what it is. It's definitely what you got to do with all the seriousness of the concussions he's had. But it was really fun between those 3 games to have so many things going on, and the Patriots kept it close. They fought for a lot of the game. It wasn't till Josh Allen went superhero mode with 2 ridiculous long touchdown passes where he's throwing from one opposite hash to Diggs. The other play, I think they said it was, I saw one of the beat writers for the Bills say it was John Brown's 4th offensive snap of the year.
I was going to say
that he caught that touchdown on, and he made a fantastic catch. And then obviously, you mentioned the 2 kickoff returns. I got chills as it was happening. I'm sure basically everyone did. You have Damar Hamlin live tweeting the whole game, which was so fun. It just felt like Buffalo wasn't going to lose that game, even when in the middle of the game it did look like the Pats were fighting hard and had a chance there. It's just too little, too late. That New England had an interesting season. 8-9, they're probably a little better than that. I'd say they're probably closer to a 9, at least one more win, maybe 10-7 with just some bad results against teams that they, you felt like they could have taken care of business with. Obviously, the Raider game comes to mind in particular. Yeah. But it was just going to be hard to top Buffalo. So I think ultimately Miami, they finished 8th in total DVOA in the year. They probably deserve to be a playoff team, even if that 5-game losing streak would make you think otherwise. The defense has gotten better while the offense has plateaued and gotten, without Tua, it's obviously a shell of its former self. But should be, that playoff game, we'll talk about it more soon. But if Tua's not playing, it's like that spread's going to be massive. But with him, I mean, they almost just beat Buffalo a few weeks ago in Buffalo, and conditions that are probably going to be worse than what it sounds like. It's going to be potentially similar weather to what it was in Week 18. So should be an interesting one. But yeah, it was fun to watch all those games kind of run down, and looking at what Pittsburgh can become. I think if I'm a Steeler fan, I'm way more optimistic right now than I was before the season even. And for the Jets, it's just about finding a quarterback, right? I know that they've been rumored a lot for Derek Carr. Who knows what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers? Not saying he's going to follow Brett Favre's suit. Some fans might forget in the 1 year with New York before going to Minnesota. But they're a team that no matter what they do on that side of the ball, I think that's the biggest thing they got to figure out, because otherwise, with that defense, their offensive line's pretty solid. Get healthier there. Jets are going to be a really fun team to follow, and what Joe Douglas has done building the structure there. Obviously, the Zach Wilson pick, I don't think we were exactly in love with it at the time. We were probably not as down on it as everyone, trying to give him a chance. But it is, that you think about the costliness of, we just saw the Texans possibly lose their chance at Bryce Young. You think of those games in 2020 that didn't really mean much, but the Jets winning and the Jags getting Trevor Lawrence. This weekend was as big of, as much as we talked about that Jags game on Thursday night earlier this year, and how that was like a great case study of the importance of getting that guy, and how maybe it is better to lose those games. Maybe this weekend was too, in terms of where the Jets are and how close they could be, and what the Jags just accomplished with that answer under center.
Yep, a lot of interesting things moving forward with a lot of those teams. But as we said, it's the Dolphins heading to the playoffs, and we will see how things unfold there. I don't love the Dolphins matchup, unlike perhaps the Jags matchup against the Chargers. So We'll see about that. All right, let's talk about the Rams, Seahawks, and Lions, Packers real quick. And then we'll talk about the other thing that certainly was one of the more wild occurrences of the day. Of course, we kind of saw how everything was going to play out. Rams, Seahawks was going to determine what happened with Packers, Lions. That is the way things had played out. And, as the Seahawks missed that kick, which sent it to overtime, you're thinking, oh boy, like this may actually be it. We may actually get the Packers versus Lions to see how this thing plays out here. But ultimately it was not the case. Seahawks find a way to win in overtime, but not to say Lions-Packers didn't still have some meaning, as we know, because the Packers just needed to win, and, well, they did not, as the Detroit Lions swept the Packers. What's the date on that? How long has it been since that happened, Dylan? I'm sure.
Oh man, I'll have to look it up. Let's see.
It's got to be a while, right? I can't even think off the top of my head what year that would have been that the Lions sweep the Packers.
Let me find that. There's got to be somewhere I can quickly
nonetheless,
find that.
The Lions, as we said, come in basically with nothing to play for, but just kind of what you expect from the Lions, given how they finished their season. They just kind of, were able to make enough plays defensively. Offense did just enough, and for the Packers, undoubtedly a disappointing finish, which of course leads to, Dylan, as we know, a very interesting kind of future now for Aaron Rodgers and what happens there. But what it comes down to is the Seahawks make the playoffs, and going into the day, I don't think that would have been what a lot of us expected based on the fact that I think everyone thought that the Packers would just find a way, but turns out the Lions go to Green Bay, win that one, and Seahawks are headed to the playoffs.
Yeah, the Packers' offensive line picked a bad time to revert to some of the stuff we saw from them earlier in the year. They did not. It was one of their worst games probably since early in the season. Defensively, I thought they did enough against a pretty potent Lions attack. They did get a bit lucky with that one. I forget if it was I think it was holding on the touchdown to Jameson Williams. And then obviously one of the Rodgers picks got called back from illegal hands to the face. So they had a few things break their way, and they still couldn't quite get it done. A lot of people kind of joked before the game that the Lions are going to be more dangerous with nothing to play for. And after Seattle, outside of knocking out the Packers, after Seattle had won, but it kind of played out with some of the play calling down the stretch and some of the unique end around, the hook and ladder little screen play to DeAndre Swift. Obviously, some of the aggressiveness on fourth down. But overall, I mean, this is kind of who the Lions have become over the course of the year. They're a team that, they also started 1-6, right? And to finish down the stretch winning 8 of their last 10 games, like in terms of hype meter, like looking at who we're going to be talking about in the offseason next year when we're most excited for, obviously the Lions are going to be high up on that list, would have been regardless of the outcome here. Would have loved for them to have been in the playoffs. Not that Seattle's not a great story with what Geno has done and how he's finally getting the chance, and you're seeing some of the things he's able to do and how great, maybe it hasn't been as perfect as it was early in the year when they're playing some defenses that weren't as great. Their defense hasn't exactly stayed at the top level as it was for all the year, but they did enough, and I don't think outside of Seattle, a lot of people thought they'd be in the playoffs in NFC, so great story still on their own. But I mean, the Lions, if they had gotten into the postseason, I don't know if anyone would give them too much of a chance against the Niners in that matchup if that had been the case, but man, it would have been something to at least get them to continue to play. They're just so fun, such a fun group. Dan Campbell, so authentic and so just likable. At least that's my read on it. I was looking at the last, you were mentioning the last time the Lions had won is actually a couple years where the Packers didn't make the playoffs, 2017 and 18. Yeah. I think the crazier stat I heard yesterday was that the last time this is a little separate, but the last time the Steelers finished with a worse record than the Browns was 1988, which is just absolutely absurd. I know there's a few years where the Browns weren't playing football, but maybe that's a little more domination than I guess maybe we're giving the Lions for credit with the Packers. But it did seem like a somewhat of a, not passing of the torch, but like the Lions kind of putting their foot down is like, this is who we are now. This is where we're going to be around. A lot of maybe questions for them. They have a super high draft pick, I think sixth, either fifth or sixth from the Rams pick that they got from Stafford. So, I mean, if they wanted to try to look at more options under center, I think they're just going to keep building the roster out and go from there, because you're seeing already just fix up the defense a bit. The offense has tons of playmakers, and Ben Johnson, we'll see if he ends up getting hired, because his stock has obviously skyrocketed with Detroit's play this year. Maybe I'm just too giddy about thinking what the Lions are doing I haven't given enough time talking here about the Packers. I think that's as big of a story as what is going to happen with Aaron Rodgers, and I think talk about a roster that's still has a lot of good pieces in my mind. Just a few tweaks here and there. I don't think they're going to be going anywhere. I think this is less of a blip. This is a team that won 13 games 3 straight years right before this. But is it with Rodgers under center? That is the question that I don't even think he knows the answer to, as he alluded to after the game last night. It's probably just like it has been the last couple off seasons, Blake. It's going to be us talking about where Rodgers is going to end up. He'll probably end up just back in Green Bay, just like he did the last 2 times. But I don't know. There might have been a difference with the way he was talking last night and just the way this year went. And from the Packers' point of view, even he said, Rodgers said it'd be a little egotistical to think that he can just decide if he wants to come back or not. Maybe this is the time where the Packers kind of do what they did when Rodgers became the starter with Brett Favre. Did they decide to move on? It's kind of crazy, the symmetry of them both winning a Super Bowl in their first few years of starting, and then having good teams that didn't quite get over the hump, and then it's just the symmetry is absolutely it's just hard to think about because you just didn't think it was going to happen the same way. Yet here we are, where I feel like I'm having flashbacks to those years.
Yeah. By the way, I said it. You kind of forget, and as we mentioned, the last couple of years it felt like a century at times. But yeah, like the Lions, 2017-18, I think that's right, and then it had been since 1991 before that. So I think we just kind of blipped on forgetting that. But it's easy to forget when you have so many football games that have been played, and some things have happened in the world, and so yes. But Lions with a huge win, and Packers a disappointing season to say the least. And listen, if you'd have told me the Bucs would still find a way to make the playoffs, right, and where both teams were at, I don't know. I probably would have banked on neither making it, but I don't know if I wouldn't have picked the Packers to make it over the Bucs the way things were trending there for a bit. But nonetheless, the Bucs are in, the Packers are not, and that is that. All right. How about this? I mean, Dylan, this whole Bears-Texans thing, right? I mean, as you're watching this play out, you're like, this isn't going to happen. There's no way. Like, come on. Like, every opportunity was there for the Texans to just be done. Like they had every opportunity to lose the game, but they find a way to win the game. And Lovie Smith gives the ultimate middle finger, apparently, on the way out of Houston, because not only does he cost the Texans the number 1 pick by winning a meaningless game against the Colts, but the Bears wind up getting the number 1 overall pick after they get destroyed by the Vikings in their finale. So we do know the order. Bears 1, Texans 2. But what a wild way that whole thing played out, because every improbable play that the Texans needed to win the game, they somehow made. And I can only imagine how things looked for Texans fans heading into that final drive against the Colts, knowing that we're about to make some just ridiculous plays and give away the number 1 overall pick, even though the teams have competing interests, I think, in terms of where they're going. Still, it doesn't. Now you bring into play, right, the possibility that someone could trade up and take the number 1 overall pick and perhaps take Bryce Young or whatever. Yeah, right. I mean, it's like it's such a wild way the thing that's played out. And again, I don't even think we know just yet just how much of an impact this one meaningless game could have for a decade to come, based on how things look when that NFL draft starts in several months.
Yeah, it's not always as striking as the difference in getting Trevor Lawrence seems to be between the Jags and Jets. Like you said, it's going to take time to see the impact here, but it's something that's built in. Maybe it's not fair to these teams at the top of the draft. This is the system that's in place, but the NFL has acknowledged in the past we're an entertainment business, right? Like this creates this kind of drama and fun for everyone to watch, and all these storylines that come along with it. It's just all built in. It's what they want. And it played out better than they could have imagined. It kind of was like the afterthought at certain times, at least for Scott Hansen's red zone, in terms of, they're following on the playoff games, or the games that have playoff implications. Yep. And then it's like, wait a second, the Texans are still here. And they're still, early in the game, I was like, wow, they're taking the lead. But then you felt like the Colts kind of started pulling away. And then, those 2 4th downs, especially the last 4th and 20 or whatever it was, I mean, just absurd. Like you said, middle finger on the way out from Lovie. It feels like it kind of seemed like he knew he was going to be gone regardless. So even then, he's not going to tell his team, as he talked about, to try to lose the game. But at the same time, obviously wouldn't have benefited them. So for him to know he's probably leaving, then to cost them the number 1 pick, it just A little bit of poetic justice there. And now, not even just like we said, cost them the number 1 pick, and maybe they're completely happy with CJ Stroud, and maybe the Bears don't get the trade package they want, and then they sit tight and draft Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, and then Bryce is still there at number 2. It's all possible. But to go from them being the number 1 pick to possibly losing Bryce, say he was the guy they really wanted, and the Colts simultaneously in their division going from a 7th or 8th pick or whatever it's going to be to the 4th pick, now having the ammunition to possibly trade with Chicago, where Chicago still feels like they can probably get Anderson or Carter at 4. It is, it's a really interesting thing. I think more likely the Colts, we've seen with Ballard, they've been patient. I think they'll take some potentially quarterback there, but it might not be Bryce, obviously. I think he's probably going to go 1 or 2 if someone doesn't trade up. Then likely he would go at 2. But it's just it was just absolutely wild how just a seemingly meaningless game. And I wish this game was in Houston, because I would have been really curious to see more Texan fans and their reactions, right? Because we know for a fact if the Jets, when they were, this is in 2020 when there's no fans outside of like a few at the Super Bowl and some of the playoff games and some games down the stretch, but there were no fans at Jets games. I can only imagine when they, if they'd been playing in LA when they beat the Rams in 2020, if the Jets fans in attendance being upset, and I'm sure they would have been booing in this case. Just a wacky kind of game that I don't even think the Colts fans in attendance knew if they should be happy or not, the way that they were kind of reacting. It was just a weird kind of circumstance, and now this seemingly meaningless game could have a huge impact for years and years on both teams.
Yep, a wild sequence, to say the least, with how everything unfolded there. But we do, again, know the number 1 pick. It's not the Texans. Could have been, but it's not. And we'll see how long-term impact that will have once we get closer to draft time. All right, Dylan, anything else before we wrap up? Again, we'll talk about the playoffs in the next episode. But, boy, just a wild Week 18. And, again, there's a lot of things still to come with a lot of teams, a lot of coaches. Still a lot to figure out for many franchises in the NFL.
Yeah, so many. I mean, we'll see, because past years we've had more of these openings come up with coaches. It seems a little slow so far. We're recording it Monday at 5 Eastern at the moment. So from 4 to 5 Eastern time, things could change pretty quickly at any moment. But in terms of other stuff, I mean, I know we talked a lot about the Lions and Rams today, and it's something that we were going to talk about at some point, and I think it could be a good point right now, because we're going to, otherwise with the playoffs and whatnot, maybe something we revisit later. But kind of looking back at the Stafford trade, I know that he's, like I said today, it looks like he's going to come back next season. It feels like he's not going to have the same injury issues with his elbow, and then obviously his neck stuff. Seems like everything should be good where he can have a full camp. And what that could mean for them. But regardless, I think the question was kind of, and I've seen this kind of floated around, is people asking who won that trade between the Lions and Rams. My initial take as a Rams fan is it's hard to say the Rams lost because they won a Super Bowl. But I can't say the Lions. I think this is, maybe there's too many times where we say there's win-win trades, but I really do feel like the matchup of, and it worked in part because the GM of the Lions is Brad Holmes, and worked for the Rams for over a decade and was a big part of their organization. And you have that kind of cohesion between those two sides when they pull that trade off, to be aware of where the Rams were, what they needed to get over the hump. It was a gamble. It still paid off with the Super Bowl, but now with the Lions, I mean, it's hard to argue that they didn't make the right decision, given how they finished 4 games ahead of the Rams this year, just only one season removed from that trade. They have the number 6 pick. They're just building all the assets, given where they were, where Stafford was. I do believe that it was a win-win for both teams, and I think for the Lions it could mean a lot for where they're moving forward, and how they were able to even last year manipulate the picks and trade back at times, and trade up, and they kind of went back and forth with what they were doing. But you look at where the roster is and what Jameson Williams only comes in at the end of the season, and you see his explosiveness, and man, I think the Lions are going to be, I'm super excited to see what they do. And it's a weird case as a Rams fan where I'm like, you think you'd be sad about oh man, we traded this pick and it's gonna be in the top 10. Instead, I'm like, I'm excited to see what the Lions do. I want them to do well. It's a weird relationship between Lions and Rams fans. The Rams kind of let them down, I guess, by not letting them into the postseason, but losing did make that pick a little better. So we got that going. But I'm curious if you have a different take, or if you think that one team maybe gets the edge in this case for that trade.
I feel like there were different expectations. Like the Lions at the time, like, the expectation was not to win a Super Bowl. And I think when you looked at it from that standpoint, like, the Rams make that trade because they feel like their window to win the Super Bowl was right there. And they ultimately did that. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, the Rams got what they wanted out of the deal. I mean, the Lions, it's, you know, again, it's not like they were, yes, like they lost a good player that led the Rams to the Super Bowl, but can you really say the Lions, like, lost the trade?
No,
Because I
no,
think,
absolutely
like
not.
you said, it's like, I think it's a win-win. Like, I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but, like, I feel like both sides of the point here probably got exactly what they needed based on the expectations. The expectation was that the Rams could win a Super Bowl if they had better quarter, which is, I know, very interesting now because we're talking about Jared Goff, who, you know, again, has done quite well for himself this season. But, yeah, like, it's an interesting discussion because I think, again, the Rams got what they wanted out of the situation. Ultimately, the Lions have gotten where they wanted to get to out of the situation, and I feel like everyone's better off for it. So I think in that instance, I think it's more of a, you know, the Rams to me win because they won the Super Bowl. But, you know, the Lions, though, if we are actually being honest about it, we know that was not where they were headed, and it was something they had to do to be able to move into the next phase of, you know, their franchise, which involved a lot of moving parts. But yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, I come out of it like I do feel that way. I think it's like, well, both parties ultimately got what they needed out of it, I think, and both are better off. So
yeah. I agree. There's like, I think part of it too, when I first was looking over this, there was a little revisionist history going on with people saying that Jared Goff.
Way.
No, not
Never.
from you, but
Never.
yeah, exactly.
No, I know. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
Never. That would never be the case, right?
People were saying like Jared Goff's a better quarterback than Stafford, and it's like, I don't know how you could have watched the games last year and thought that the Rams would have pulled off some of the things that they did without Stafford in there. Not to say take anything away from what Jared has done this season. And I think from his point of view, I think the fresh start, you know, how tied together him and McVay were and some of the things and the friction that started to develop, I think it was just, again, another example of this trade being the best case for not just the Stafford, for Matthew Stafford and the Lions and the Rams, but also for Jared. I think it just basically it hits on each point of, and just to think that the Rams would have done what they did last year with Jared instead, I think that discredits what Stafford did, and I know he had injuries and stuff, and whatever you want to take from this, what happened in 2022, but I mean, they were a completely different offense week one last season through the Super Bowl. Some of the plays that he made against the Bucs, you know, gets away with one big one against the Niners, but some other big throws obviously in that game and the Super Bowl. It's hard to say that the Rams have the kind of infrastructure as a system at this moment in 2022 that the Lions had with the weapons they have, the offensive line strength and the youth. That trade really kickstarted everything for what Detroit's becoming right now. And even if the Rams hadn't won the Super Bowl, I don't think it's a bad approach to try to fix up a position that's very important like quarterback to take a shot at getting a ring. And I maybe I'm in the minority, but I think the Rams next year, if with these guys healthy, still should in the NFC. Maybe not if they're in the AFC, but I think they still should have playoff expectations next year, pending Stafford, Kupp, Donald not being completely hurt, them and not completely whiffing on this draft with an offensive line that over the course of the year, even with all the injuries, started to play better. And you think about the guys that are going to come back. I don't know, but it's just an interesting kind of thing that, especially with the Lions capping off the season like this again. I don't know. We quickly forget what just happened a year ago and what Stafford and the Rams were able to do. So it's just an interesting thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like we said, kind of star. That's the drop-off they had can make you really kind of rethink some things and start to play the revisionist history a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, they are the defending Super Bowl champions. They will not be in the playoffs to defend that championship, but there will be a new champion crowned. We'll see if the Rams can get back on track next season with or without their current head coach, and we'll see again what things look like for Matthew Stafford moving forward. So there you go. There are some thoughts on, again, a lot of things, not just Week 18, but a lot of decisions to be made throughout the NFL regarding, again, head coaching jobs, defensive coordinators, GMs, drafts. Like, there's a lot. This is, as we know, kind of that fallout at the end of the regular season. But the playoffs are near, Dylan, and of course we got it all covered over Clutch Points. Let everybody know where they can find all of that.
Yeah, go to the Clutch Points app to follow all the playoff games coming up in the NFL section, too. You can read all of our stuff, looking over the best candidates for all the coaching openings, covering all the news rumors going on with those, injury updates. Already looking, I'm sure, pretty soon at possible new teams for Aaron Rodgers, just like it's becoming an annual tradition to debate this, and then nothing ends up happening. But we will still all be all together, still look over that. You go to ClutchPoints.com to our NFL section there. The site's revamped. Everything's working pretty well right now. The whole thing, I'm just excited about what we're doing with our NFL coverage overall as a company, but also, the playoffs are just so fun to follow. And I think this year, last year set a high expectation when you think about the divisional games and every result coming down to the final play, being whether it be field goals or the overtime touchdown from the Chiefs team winning. A lot of really close championship games in the Super Bowl, but man, you look at the quarterback set, and I know that Tua, there's a probably greater chance than not that he's not going to play, but you look at the 7 quarterbacks in the AFC, and you see that Patrick Mahomes is the oldest at 27, and you look at the talent of those guys. It's like, I just get so excited thinking about the future of that conference and overall the league. But it just should be a really fun playoff.
Yep, we'll talk about them all as you talked about in our next episode. But for now, find everything at Clutch Points. Check out all the great stuff there. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. Thanks as always for listening to the podcast, and we'll talk to you next time here on the Establish the Pass podcast.